Today, I'm going to go over the Faith First system that I developed while I was in graduate school. Wish I had developed it a lot earlier than this, but once I did, it really helped accelerate my progress on my PhD thesis and research and everything, and finally got finished. And I've found that it's been helpful to me after graduate school as well. It's just a general system of prioritizing things and getting my life in order. I call it Faith First. It'll become obvious why in a second. So the origins of it were really related to Jamal King, the 9 to 5 millionaire. If you follow Eric Thomas or any of those guys, Jamal King was kind of somebody that went to all of the ET conferences and everything, and then became one of the guys that are on ET's podcast. So I used to listen to that podcast quite a bit, and he had this thing that he would talk about called the five pillars, and he had actually has a blog about it on his website. But for him, he had this idea of five pillars where he said, really, if you boil life down, there are really five major areas of life. And for him, those five areas of life are faith, family, financing, fitness, and freedom. And so I remember hearing that because I didn't have a good system for myself in terms of how I prioritize things in my life. And he had this system and it seemed like a pretty good one. And whenever I see frameworks or systems like that that are useful, I really try to make them my own and then figure out how I can apply it to my own life. So I started thinking about the order that he gave them in. So if you look at, he always kind of says faith is first, then family, and then he talks about finances and fitness and freedom. And I remember thinking, okay, let me make sure that that makes sense for me. Faith and family almost go without saying. Clearly, faith in God, my spiritual trust in Jesus Christ, all of those things, that category is first. It comes before family, it comes before anything. So that made sense that faith would be first, made sense that family, people would be after that. That includes friends as well and that kind of thing. But then the final three, finances, fitness, and freedom, it wasn't clear to me that that would be the right order. And I've played around with different iterations of this, different, I guess the actual term would be permutations or combinations mathematically. But again, uh, I played around with fitness being kind of the next thing after family and finances being the next thing after family. And I eventually kind of came to the place where I figured that finances and fitness would really need to be the lower two out of those five, and that probably something like freedom would be next. But it wasn't always clear to me that freedom should be one of the five. Those four go without saying. Your finances, your fitness, your faith, and your family, those are the four big areas. Freedom was the one I just never really thought would really fit as being a pillar. And so 2 Timothy 4:7, Paul says, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. And so I began to kind of develop this idea of fight being the fifth pillar for me instead of freedom. Although, even when I think about things that I fight for, the things that are my fight, it's generally related to freedom, either freeing myself or potentially freeing other people. I know eventually I want to start a robotics company and do some things that help people where we can apply technology and and potentially AI as well to help people and to actually give people more freedom. So freedom is a part of it, but it's hard for me to call finishing graduate school, for instance, a freedom issue. In some ways it is, but you can you can basically make anything a fight. And so I liked that language of fight more than freedom, but fighting for freedom would be, a way to mix the two. So I decided, okay, I like Jamal's five pillars, but I'm going to replace his freedom pillar with the fight pillar. And then that way I can apply it to anything, even things that might not directly seem like they're related to freedom. But I can relate just about anything to something that I'm fighting for or a problem I'm working through. So, okay, now we've got faith, family, fight, finances, and fitness. Now, does that work? Well, it does in a way, but one of the things I came to is that not all pillars have equal importance. So the framework here was one of pillars that hold up your life, I guess is the way to think about it. So these five pillars hold up your life. But the more I thought about it, that's not a great example because generally, if you take this picture, you have the five pillars. You might say that the middle pillar holds the most weight or something like that. But in most cases, you want all of the pillars to have equal strength. You don't want all of the weight to be on one. And so it was difficult because it seems clear that some of these are more important than others. So to call them all pillars, there's something off about it. So I thought a lot about it and I came up with a different metaphor, you might call it, or a different way of seeing it. And so one of the things I had to do was make sure that that order was right. So is faith more important than the other four? Yes. Is family more important than the remaining three? Yes. Then it came to the last three. Okay, is fight more important than finances and fitness? This was difficult because, again, when finances aren't great or when fitness isn't great, it's hard to work on something that you're fighting for. But I think when it came down to it, I figured, okay, assuming we have some base level of fitness and some base level of finances, basically when I was in graduate school, the question I asked myself is, if I get to the end of this year and I finish my PhD, but I'm still not making that much money because I haven't started working yet, and fitness wise, I'm not in the greatest of shape, would I be okay with that compared to the other combinations? Let's say I put fitness first and I was in the best shape of my life at the end of 2023, but I didn't finish my PhD. Or I was in the best shape of my life and making more money than I'd ever made in my life, but I hadn't finished my PhD. Would that be okay? And the answer was no. That was the way for me to figure out, oh, the fight thing is more important. I could be broke. I could be in not great shape at the end of the year, but if I have that PhD, then I will feel very good about where I am because I can go and I can fix the fitness and I can fix the finances. So once I got that order straightened out, it did help me to finish my PhD because part of the reason why I had spent so much time, why it took me so long, is I often didn't really prioritize the fight over fitness and finances. And so this is from my Instagram, and this is back, you can't see it right now, but it's from April 17th, 2018. So over 6 years ago. This is, I took Instagram, I was stronger at that point than I've ever been. Squatted 405 pounds. I weighed about 210 at the time. So you can tell I'm a little bit chubbier right there. But in case you're thinking that the bar is just on my back, I actually got all the way down to that depth with 405 on my back. And I had to fight it, but I got it all the way back up. And so the video's on my Instagram if you don't believe me. So I prioritized fitness during that time. And I got really strong, strong as I'd ever been. We'll be back there eventually, but at the time I wasn't focusing as much on my research as I should have been. I was trying to focus on getting myself fit, and then okay, once I'm fit, then I can focus on my fight. Well, that didn't really work. Finances. So I was driving for Uber. I drove for Lyft as well, actually, and I delivered pizza for Donato's in South Huntsville. I did DoorDash quite a bit. I literally did hundreds of deliveries between DoorDash and Donato's. And when you do all of that, it's kind of hard to then get to the end of the day or even focus the early part of your day on doing the work that you need to do to finish your PhD. So if I had been more disciplined and still put in the focus that I needed to for graduate school, it still would have been a case that I would have eventually had to figure out, okay, that's not the right order. And so yeah, that is what I had to, those were the times where I would put fitness or finances first, and it really didn't help. I didn't really get traction until I put the fight before finances and fitness. And of course, faith and family come before those other three things. And so the way I look at it now is thinking of your life like it's a field. like it's a property. So instead of 5 pillars, I use 5 components of a field. And so you're going to notice a lot of F's here. You're fixing your field with faith first. And so there's 5 components of this field. Faith is the foundation. Family is the floor. Fight is the frame. Finances are the fence. And fitness is the finish. Okay. I'll explain what those are in a second. And in later videos, I'll go into depth on each one and how like I had to create systems within each one. Like what does it mean to have faith as your foundation or fight as your frame? But I'll just briefly explain what those meant to me and why this framework made a lot more sense to me. Faith is the foundation. If you're building a house on this property, you start with the foundation. And if you have no foundation, then you don't really have much of a house. It's going to fall down as soon as there are any winds, or it's just not going to be a sturdy house. So you have to begin with foundation. It is the most important part. You have, I was talking to a friend who was going to buy a house in a different area of North Alabama here, and there was a crack in the foundation. And he decided not to buy the house, or they were able to get out of buying the house, and they bought a house in a different place. And he said he drove by that property that he was going to buy, and no one still bought it because people have been trying to fix the foundation. But what they should have done was just torn it all out, I guess, and then rebuilt from scratch and had a good foundation. You got to start with faith as the foundation. It's the most important part. Next, family is the floor. Now you might be thinking, family's the floor. That seems like that's a bad thing. But what I mean by floor is it's the standard, right? You're not going to go lower than the family and friends that are around you for the most part. Jim Rohn's famous quote is that you are the average of the 5 people that you are most often around. When it comes to family, really, you're building on top of what your parents or your grandparents did before you. And so we're always building on what those before us did. And so for the most part, you're going to fall to the level of wherever your family is. And hopefully you rise far above that. But family is the floor. Now that's a good thing. And if you are leveling up the friends you're around and the family that you're around, your floor or your standard for your life gets higher and higher. So when you're around positive people in your family and maybe spending less time around negative people in your family, then what is your floor in terms of your emotional stability and all of that kind of thing? Your floor gets higher. And so that's what you want to focus on, improving those relationships with good people that you're around, and then distancing yourselves from people who are negative. Fight is the frame. So you can think about this in 2 ways. We're talking about the frame of a house, right? The walls. And so your fight is that, but there's also a different sense as well, because similar to family being the floor, where the floor is kind of this lowest common denominator, the standard, fight is also a way to look at things. And so the framing of your house is, or the framing of your life is the fight. You see things through the lens of what you're fighting for. And so for me, I was trying to finish my PhD. I was specifically studying walking in humans and trying to apply that to humanoid robots. So, I mean, I saw my work everywhere. It was the lens through which I saw everything. I was thinking about it all the time. Whatever the thing is you're fighting for is your frame. It's how you view things. It's how you see the world. And so being really careful about what that is important, and really putting a lot of focus on it is important. So the way I think about things now and the way I view the world now, it's based on whatever my fight is now. And that frames things. It's also this idea of being the frame or the walls of the house. Finances are the fence. This is an interesting one, because if you think about a property, you could have a property that's very large. And so the potential for building on that property is very large, but you have a tiny fence, and you can only build that house within that fence. If you widen that, how the area that fence would be in, then that allows you to do more things. That's how finances are. The better you have your finances, the more room you have to maneuver. If you have a tiny fence, then you you're not able to have as much yard, you're not able to have as much house. But if you're able to widen the fence, you're able to do a lot more things. And so that's the way I think of finances. So it's important. So in this picture, you have this. I think this is just a dog fence. So it's supposed to be a fence where you can just let your dog out. But the idea is, if that fence was all the yard that those people had, if they could expand that fence, it would completely enhance their lives. And so, same thing with finances. Finances are important because it allows you to expand what you're able to do, what you're capable of doing in the world and for your family. Fitness is the finish. So we talked about a foundation, a floor, walls, a fence, but you got to have a roof on the house. And fitness is the finish. Fitness is the roof on the house. You don't. So it's really important, and yet it's still not as important as the foundation or some of these other things. But it is important. And so if your fitness is not in order, you end up having a roof like this where it's leaking and it's ruining other things in your house and on your property. So fitness is the finish. It is important. And so it'd be interesting to get to some of the fitness changes that I made where we'll talk about this in a second, but for a time I had to maybe not spend as much time as I would have liked to on fitness. So I wasn't able to keep squatting 405. My squat is a whole lot less than that right now. I think right now I squatted 275 for 5 the other day. So I could probably go 3 something right now, 315 plus probably squat, but I'm nowhere close to squatting the 405 I was back then. But we'll get back there. But we had to step away from that to get the PhD done, to work on other things. And so that's important. So my system for getting my life in order was simply to kind of do these 3 things related to those 5 things I just mentioned. The first thing was to ruthlessly get rid of, or at least reduce, the time and energy that I was spending on things that are not in one of those 5 pillars. So fun is not one of those 5 pillars, right? I was so I wasn't staying on top of where people were in the NBA or with football or that kind of thing. I would spend some time on that when I took a day where I wouldn't be working on the research on Sundays usually. And so during that time, I could catch up on that stuff. But during the week, I wasn't watching any of that stuff because I need to cut all of that out so I could spend my time and energy on those things that matter most. Those five, I don't call them pillars anymore, but those 5 F's that are parts of the field, the components of the field. So then I would make decisions on what I would do and how I would spend my time and what I would do based on that order, and that order specifically: faith, then family, then fight, then finances, then fitness. And so, no, I don't work towards trying to get a 405 squat if that's going to take away from my fight. No, I don't spend as much time trying to make more money. I started an Amazon bookstore in my final year of graduate school because it was something that wouldn't use as much time. I could do it, but I could also work on my PhD work. And so I couldn't devote as much time to that because there was something for my fight that I needed to do. But it's also important to point out that in some cases, I needed to neglect lower priority components to make progress in the higher priority components. So I was teaching Bible classes throughout, and that takes a lot of time to prepare for that. But that was never a thing where I was going, oh, well, let me not teach this Bible class this year because I need to just get my PhD finished. No, PhD comes after, the fight comes after faith. So you continue to grow as much as possible in the faith realm, in the faith area. And same thing with family. Spending time with family is important. So I never get to a place where it's like, well, let me just stay away from my family or not talk to my family at all and just go monk mode. You see people say this on the internet. It's just not necessary. If you cut out a lot of the fun stuff, if you cut out a lot of the other things that you're doing that take away from that, and you focus on maybe just immediate family and that type of thing, you can neglect some of these lower priority pillars and completely cut out stuff that's not necessary and make progress in higher priority pillars. So I call it faith first because faith comes first. Faith, at no point was I ever saying, well, maybe I should not go to go to church as much and or not study scripture as much and not do that first thing in the morning. No, faith first. At the very end, when I was finishing up the PhD and I was working basically all day on my thesis, day after day after day, the day still begins with Bible study and prayer. That's how every day begins. So I don't think I get it done without making sure things are in their proper place. Still spend time with family. But then after that, yeah, I wasn't spending as much time on the bookstore. I wasn't spending as much time in the gym. I stopped going to the gym. I went for walks instead because I could I could basically get up in the morning, have Bible study and prayer, then get to work. Then I'd have lunch. I'd go for a walk. So that was some movement, some exercise. I'd come back. I'd work some more. I'd have dinner. I'd go for another walk. I'd come in. I'd work some more. And then I'd go to bed. And I would just repeat that over and over again. What did that do? Well, it basically said, hey, faith first. There were times where I'd spend time with family, but most days it was start with faith and then work on your fight all day. And that's what got me to the finish line. Luke 6:48, Jesus was talking about those who heard his words and obeyed them. And so when you hear Jesus' words and obey them, that's talking about faith. That obedience comes from faith. Jesus said he is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood rose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it. So faith comes first and then all those other things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a later video where I'll go into depth on each one of those individually. So I'll probably do a series on this. Like the next 5 videos will be on faith being the foundation, on family being the floor, and then fight being the frame, finances being the fence, and then finally fitness being the finish. And so I'll do like individual videos because I have these frameworks that I use within the framework. So that might be helpful for people. I know if I had this earlier, it would have accelerated everything for me. But now that I have it, it's really helping me with other areas of life as well. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.